Hey, it's Fitz, and just before we get to the Rock Radio podcast, I wanted to tell you about Legacy Casts. Legacy Cast is basically a private podcast for your family, and you record these so that you can pass down all of the stories and all of the interesting information, basically your legacy for years to come, and we can do both audio and video, your choice. You come to our studio and either one of us can ask the questions or you can ask the questions yourself. Bring in your parents, bring in your grandparents, bring in your uncles, your aunts, your good friends, whatever. It's called a Legacy Cast. I invite you to check it out at yourlegacycast.com or rockvox.com. And now, on with the podcast.
Round, 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 go the records. It's time to smile and swing a while with Palvino. Jack Palvino is on the air, the smoothest record man anywhere. Get set to listen, cause here we go, the Smilin Jack Palvino Show.
Welcome to the Rock Radio podcast, a podcast devoted to radio and Rochester and the history and all the great voices and talents that made up this wonderful legacy. And legacy is a perfect word for my guest today, Jack Palvino. Smilin Jack.
Yes, still smiling.
Still smiling. He's got two books out there you can get: On the Air, My Life in Radio, 1957 to 97, and Off the Air, Reflections on a Life in Broadcasting. And he signed them for me, which is very, very special. Thank you for coming in, sir.
You're welcome.
This is, it's an honor for me, and I kind of have a different perspective because I didn't grow up here. My parents are down in Florida, so
okay.
I don't have the legacy, top of mind like other people would have. But because I did work a short time in radio here in Rochester, it's I know who you are. I've met you a bunch of times, and I know what you've done in this town. So it's really an honor to have you here to talk about it. So and the 100th anniversary of Wham, coming up
in next year. 2022, Wham went on the air. And I had to take notes because I forget what I have for breakfast. Wham went on the air July 11th, 1922. And do you know who owned it at that time?
Was it George Eastman? No.
Well, in a way it was. The University of Rochester and the Eastman School of Music, which was, of course, gifted by George Eastman, and the Democrat Chronicle, Gannett newspapers owned it.
Really?
Yeah. This was July 11th, 1922. And as a matter of fact, it was George Eastman who gave Wham its call letters. He liked hard sounds like Kodak and Wham.
Yeah.
And so that is the historical root of the call letters, which are great call letters.
We were just talking about that with someone, and I said, I'm pretty sure George Eastman is the one that came up with that.
Oh, he did some wonderful things.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, he really was quite a guy. I mean, he had Wham sending musical concerts and all kinds of lessons all throughout the Rochester Public School District way back in the late 20s.
Such an amazing forward thinker he was, wasn't he?
Amazing man.
Just the things that he came up with.
The more I read about him, the more I'm impressed.
And like every amazing thinker, he had his interesting quirks too. He was a difficult man to work for, a tough manager, and
tough guy. Yeah,
a very tough guy, but very results driven. And look what he built.
But generous as could be.
Yeah,
he gave away $10 million, whatever needed, he would come up with it.
Yeah,
he started the Eastman School of Music and got them going nicely. So that was where radio began in Rochester. So you could say radio will be 100 years old here next year.
Yeah. And you started just, 30 years after that, roughly?
Roughly.
Or 35 years after that?
I started in 1958.
1958. So,
And I ended, kind of, in 1998. So 40 years.
40 years. Nice
Yes.
round number.
Yes.
And you, from what I read in your bio, you were on the track to be a lawyer. You were going to law
Yes.
school.
Yes.
And you said, no, you liked music. Was it music that really got you into radio?
It was
The love of music?
It was music, but more than that, it was the business of radio. I was totally attracted by the camaraderie of the radio stations, and I really loved the theater of the mind,
Yeah.
which unfortunately is not being used now the way it was.
Yeah.
Because we had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, that's the stuff that I really like. And we're actually doing some of that here in little bits and pieces in podcasts, like,
Yes.
the old radio theater where you've got
Exactly.
parts that are playing and there's sound effects and things
Right.
like that. Yeah.
Right.
That's the best.
I can remember being taken to the old Wham studios for a program where the hoofbeats of a horse were done by an engineer with little
Coconuts?
coconuts on, right on the table. Wonderful stuff.
You're banging two coconuts
Yeah,
together.
dude. And there was a couple. There were a couple of radio announcers who used to, when they did the remote radio broadcast, when they weren't there, would take a pencil and crack it against the microphone and say, "Oh, there's a signal to write." That's so it goes way. Joe Cullinane, Ed Penfield, way back when. That's what they used to do before they could be there in person.
That's funny.
Yeah. So they wouldn't know because they would be receiving sometime even before radio by teletype these messages. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a quick funny story. They asked one of the writers, I think it was Red Smith, how they thought Bill Stern would do broadcasting ball games, baseball games.
Yeah.
Bill was known to make up stuff on the air, and because it was radio, no one could see it.
People still do that.
Really?
Even when you can see what happened.
That's hard to believe. Yeah. And so they asked him how he would do doing football game. He said, "I don't know. You got and horse races." He said, "I don't know. You got a little trouble lateraling a horse." Because they would always correct the say, "Oh, he lateraled the ball to,
Right.
to the guy who really hit."
Lateraling a horse.
Yeah.
I think that's illegal in Alabama, actually.
Yes, as well it should be.
Yes. So when you first got into radio back in the 50s, who was your guy? Who was your mentor?
Bob Keeve.
Bob Keeve.
Kieve. He just passed away at age 98.
Bless him.
Bless him is right. I've never met anyone like him in my entire life. He was an ex-speechwriter for President Eisenhower. He was a brilliant man, graduated from Harvard, and he just was attracted to radio. And he was brought to Rochester by Maury Foreman, who owned B. Foreman Clothing. Everyone knows him here, and founded Midtown Plaza with Gil McCurdy, to run WBBF. And Bob hired me and sent me to Geneva immediately, which was a farm system that they had built up similar to baseball teams. You would go AAA, AA, and
Right.
Geneva, Utica, Rochester was the route. And so Bob is the guy who hired me. And trying to be a smart guy, I said, "Bob, maybe I should change my name to Jack Pal. It's easier to remember." He said, "Come in the office." Sat me down with the breakout of the Monroe County population heritage. See this? It's 47% Italian American. You're not changing your name.
Yeah.
So that was that. And from there, Bob was just my guru throughout my career for the next 20 years in the BBF family chain, which was in Midtown Plaza because our owner Maury Foreman,
Right.
was Midtown's owner, Maury Foreman.
How long were you in the farm leagues?
2 years.
2 years. So that's not too bad.
No.
2 years to get up to the show.
Yep.
Yeah.
1958 to 1960. Yeah.
And when you first came to start to do your radio in Rochester, what was that feeling like when you were the first time you opened the mic and you were on the air in Rochester? How did that feel?
My knees were knocking so hard, and I was so happy. I felt like I was in heaven.
Yeah.
I just couldn't have been happier in my entire life. And Bob put me in between Joe Dean, who was on from 10 to 3, and Nick Nixon, who was on 3 to 7, at a 1 to 3 slot. And then I would float around doing vacation shifts for everyone else. BBF was in 1960, most popular radio station in the country. Not just Rochester, the country, according to a Birch survey and a Hooper survey. And I'm amazed at this one. This is a dandy.
Wow. So they had, is that done by ratings?
Yes. Yeah, it was done by a guy named Bob Hooper. And what he did was do ratings by telephone and talk you through about a half-hour interview and ask who you listened to and how long. Hooper eventually went out of businesses, and there was another one called Pulse, which also was a similar type of survey. But BBF was one of the most popular stations ever, and it was the breeding grounds for more wonderful talent than any station around. It's very interesting. Rochester has had cycles where almost every station took its turn at the top of the heap. And in that, for 20 years, WBBF, top of the heap in Rochester. You could walk down the street. Well, we would pull into Don Koznick's Sunoco on Monroe Avenue for gas. Don said, "Boy, you guys were funny this morning. Forget paying for the gas."
Those
You'd
were
go
the
out
days.
to dinner. People say, "Oh, I love that joke, Nick. Come on over, Nick." And every Greek restaurant in town, and Nick was a solid Greek. I don't think he paid for a meal for 10 years.
Wow.
Because TV wasn't yet as popular.
You guys were the superstars.
That's right. Radio was the king at that time. And before that, WSAY, owned by an eccentric engineer, Gordon Brown, back in the 40s and 50s, was the breeding ground for many of us because they hired us. I'll never forget it. 67.5 cents an hour. And no pay for overtime.
Wow.
How about that?
Well, the pay in radio hasn't really gone up that much since then. But
About the same now, right? I guess
now.
I've lost track.
How many radio stations were around when you were at BBF? How much competition was there?
I think there were about 7
radio stations.
7 stations. About half of what there is now.
Yeah. But still the competition for entertainment for ears was still low. If there's only around 7 radio stations, otherwise people were outside or they were reading, or going to the movies or something because TV wasn't as big.
No, it wasn't, because we had a TV in the 40s, and I remember it was black and white, 10 inches, and it went off at midnight, and they played the national anthem.
Right.
So TV was not a factor. It was just print and radio. And in stages, every station took a turn at the top of the heap. Like WSAY with Jerry Sherwin, my old roommate, Jerome Isaacson, Melody Corner. And that station, which hired us with no experience, John Hill hired me. I remember he was the manager on East Avenue. Was the only place you get started because there wasn't any communication course. A few, Newhouse and a couple other colleges, but not many. So that was our experience.
Yeah.
Gary Smith, Mort Nussbaum, all of us started at WSAY, and he wouldn't let us use our own name. the owner, Gordon Brown. I was Jerry Jack, Mac McGuire, Tommy Thomas.
Now, why was that?
We thought that by using phony names when we left the station, the audience wouldn't notice, which is nonsense.
Oh, so someone else would, if you left the station, someone else would come in and be Jerry Jack.
Yes.
With a completely different voice.
Correct. I used to do mornings as Jerry Jack. At 9 o'clock, I say, it's 9 o'clock. This is Jerry Jack at WSAY. Well, occasionally Gary Smith, my good friend, would be late coming on after me. And I say, okay, it's 9:03. This is Tommy Thomas. Same voice.
How long did that last? I mean, people had to pick up on that.
It lasted as long as he owned the station.
Really?
Mac McGuire, Tommy Thomas.
I mean, was it kind of a joke for everyone to be
It
like,
was.
it's clearly the same guy?
We had 4 guys who were Jerry Jack in the same room.
Must have been confusing at
Oh, it was.
for conferences.
The reunions were brutal. Oh, yeah. We had much fun there, though.
So when you were, getting going and everything, and you guys were number one,
Mm-hmm.
when did you really know that it was like big time? Like this was a really good thing that was happening?
I think WBBF was when I really knew this is a big deal.
Yeah.
We had various functions. We had the BBF all-family prom, free tickets, but we filled up the War Memorial. We would bring in people like George Maharis, Brenda Lee, all
Same War Memorial that's down at
Yep.
Blue Cross Arena?
right,
Yeah.
Blue Cross Arena now, and the family prom, things like that. When I went to that first prom and saw there were 10,000 people there, I said, whoa,
Yeah.
somebody's listening. And that station, the impact of that station is still remembered by most Rochesterians
Mhm.
because BBF stayed on top of the heap for about the next 15 years, 10 to 15 years. And that's a long time, 1,000-watt station you can't hear on a windy day in Canandaigua.
Right.
And it was beating the original leader, which was Wham, clearly, and WSAY before that. And then the next station to take its turn at the top was WEZO, Easy Listening. And that caught on like crazy. Just one morning man, everything else totally automated. As a matter of fact, I have a box at home in my office of the entire 24-hour music rotation for EZO today.
Really? Was that a reel-to-reel tape?
It was. It was. And one of the first automation systems. But it was like a music for everyone at home.
Yeah.
And that made that station very dominant for a while. So every station kind of took its turn. And then after that, it was our pleasure in 1978 to buy WVOR. And we took that station up to the number one spot, too. And that lasted for about 10 years.
So I know that you've influenced quite a few people that are in radio now that work in town.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was going to school for radio in the early 90s,
Yes.
the concept was, and this was down in South Florida, it was like, well, South Florida is like a number 11 market. You're never going to get into this market. You're going to have to start off and take a job in Wichita,
Yeah.
doing the Cal report or whatever.
Yeah.
But I noticed that a lot of people that have come into radio here that are from here ended up staying here, and there wasn't a lot of traveling around with those folks. A few, but it seems like in this area, people got into radio where they lived, and they stayed in radio where they lived, and they didn't move around much. Why do you
That's
think
true.
that is?
Well, I think that most of the folks who are in radio, as you know, move around or else don't get a promotion. They say if you don't want to move, you're not going to advance yourself. We had a lot of Rochesterians who wanted to stay here. Nick Nixon was from Long Island, but once he got here, he said, I'm living here.
Yeah.
This is where I'm keeping my family and raising my children.
Yeah.
And Joe Dean came in from Pittsburgh. He's same thing. Jerry Fogel, local boy, decided he wanted to stay until he decided to leave to go to Hollywood to be in movies and TV.
And that you can understand.
That one, I can understand that.
Yeah.
And we had people from all, Leon Marguerite, biggest man in nighttime radio, 300 pounds. He had a Philadelphia sub every night, made the studio smell like an onion factory when we came in the next day. But once he got here, said, whoa, this is where I'm staying. And I'm the same way, because many years later, in 1978, when Bob Keeve went to my guru, San Jose, to buy a radio station, he offered me the opportunity to go out there. And I said, I don't want to raise my 3 children in California.
Yeah.
And I decided to stay here with them. So I think it's something about the marketplace in radio and the radio camaraderie in this market is frankly different than it is in most markets. It's frankly more cutthroat in other markets.
Yeah.
Here, we formed the Rochester Radio Broadcasting Association in 1990. And we would meet and discuss how to recruit people for radio. We would trade to a blind trust all of our billing figures so that we knew who was doing well and who wasn't and what the market was billing, things that were beneficial to everyone. That doesn't happen in every market.
Yeah.
And I think that this collegiality was one of the reasons why a lot of the guys and gals stayed here. That's the way I look at it anyhow.
Yeah, it's definitely unique, and I know it's cutthroat in other places because I've heard the stories. I tried to get into radio down in Florida and
Whereabouts?
in the Miami Fort Lauderdale market.
Oh yeah.
I happened to get a job in video and ended up going that route for my career. So I wasn't trying hard for a long time. But I did notice that phenomenon that there's a lot of people here that once they get here, they stay here.
Yes. I think it says a lot about the city, which at that time was a little different, like 100% than it is now. You had Kodak, Xerox, Bausch & Lomb, the big 3.
Yeah.
People.
City on the move.
You got that right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you can't get a direct flight from Rochester to anywhere.
Yeah.
Before, you could get a flight to anywhere at any time at Rochester Airport.
So clearly, the industry that was here at the time had a big influence on the media market.
Yes,
on
it did.
What was going on.
At that time, when I started in 1958, Rochester was the 36th market in the country. And national business traditionally went to the top 50 markets. So it meant a lot to get that ranking. Now it's the 56th market. So we've lost a lot of people in the Rochester metro market.
Well, I mean, that's one of the challenges that the local colleges have is keeping the students here after college. They are here, they come and get a great education, and then they're off somewhere else.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can understand that because they have to follow opportunity.
Yeah.
So that's the reason for that.
And opportunity is something that you're familiar with because we're talking about how, and you said it yourself, how if you want to move up, if you want to get promoted, you got to move away.
Yes.
But you took a different route.
Yeah.
you went and bought the joint.
Yeah, I figured, one way when you're a morning man to stop getting chewed out by the boss is if you buy the station, because you'll be the boss.
Right.
And there are other far more restrictive things that happen.
Right.
Yeah, that was 1978 when I ran into Bud Wertheimer.
So you're in the business for 20 years by the time this happens.
Yeah, and I'm in my 40s. And it's hard to be a teenage idol when you're in your 40s. So I said, and As my father said, it's about time you got a real job.
Yeah.
And I was approached by a gentleman from Syracuse whose dad owned the music franchise and didn't know what to do with an FM signal, which was quite good. The WVOR frequency, 100.5. And I actually was trying to buy the station for my guru, Bob Keeve. He said, you could stay in Rochester and run it for me. And suddenly, when we had our interview with my late partner, Bud Wertheimer, a great talent and a brilliant man, he said, look, rather than buy it for your guru, why don't you and I form a company? We were at the Manhattan restaurant on East Avenue eating blueberry muffins, which I still love. I wish that restaurant was still open. And so we got together and formed the Lincoln Group Limited, which is his middle name, Lincoln, and bought VOR. And were turned down by every banker who said, if you ever go into business, come see me. It suddenly developed a little loss of memory.
Right, yeah.
Jack who, Bud who. But eventually we went to Boston, found a banker at the Bank of Boston who had faith in us.
So you actually had to leave Rochester and get
to get the money.
Money from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was interesting to us too.
Yeah. I'm sure that was quite a surprise.
Yeah.
You thought it was a done deal, right?
I thought it was a given.
Yeah. Like these people are your best friends. You know, they're like, hey,
so they said, yeah.
Oh, you need money.
Oh, no, forget him. Yeah. Jack who?
Jerry Jack.
Yeah, Jerry
Tommy
Jack.
Thompson.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. So that was an interesting development. And we copied what we did, the AM format of WBBF, and put it on FM. I mean, things no one ever thought of doing. Helicopter traffic, news every half hour in the morning.
Yeah, so that's a really good subject. Give me a breakdown of the split from when FM came around and AM, because AM was the top dog for years and years and years, and FM was kind of like, I've heard people say, when that came out, they said that'll never catch on. FM is, nothing.
Well, as you well know, the FM signal is far superior.
Sure.
But because it's line of sight. So what happened, well, no one knew what to do with the FM signals they had. For instance, Wham bought WHFM in 1941 during the war. They didn't know what to do with it at that time. So no one had found a use except for background music like Muzak and things like that, or hard rock, which eventually CMF took its turn at the top of the radio pile with. And no one had ever treated it the way they treated AM. And we said, why not? And Bud and I said, we're going to try this. It worked. I couldn't believe how fast it worked. We had commentaries with Dick Tobias, a real curmudgeon. He's the only guy I ever met got into a fight with Santa Claus at the Christmas party. And I'll tell you, the audience flocked to us. We were rated number 18 in a market of 13 stations when we bought it. And what happened within a year, we had taken over the top billing spot in the marketplace, thanks to our sales guru, Ed Musicus, best salesperson I've ever met. And the audience came over within a year and a half. So by the second year, we were number one in the whole city.
And how is that received by the industry, by people in other cities? Were they looking at you guys going, what?
Yeah. We got calls from all over the country. What are you doing? You know, radio's a copycat business.
Sure.
And the NAB and the RAB came down and said, we're writing a book in search of excellence. Can we interview you? Well, they interviewed Bud, Ed, and I, and every station in the country picked up a copy of that book. Within 6 months, people were putting news on FM suddenly. They copied us from California to Florida. That's how fast it happened, because no one ever thought of duplicating AM on FM because they were afraid of losing business. Just the reverse was true. Our business was rocketing. And so that switch to FM was the key to our whole company's growth. And we ended up with 7 radio stations.
Wow.
And eventually, ironically, the station we beat, Wham, was the station we bought in 1986.
That must have been an interesting
We had to,
feeling to
we had
buy the competition.
Yeah, we did. We had to turn around the station we just beat. And we did. It took us a while, but we did. And that Wham is a special station. It just has that 50,000 watt clear channel blowtorch radio signal. And we would have contests at night. How far are you listening from? We'd get cards from Norway, Sweden, Canada, Mexico, all over the world.
Now, but that's still the same Wham that's AM 1180.
Yes, that's still there.
So at that point where you bought them, how many other radio stations did you own?
At that point, we owned 5 stations, one in Buffalo, WBUF, and then we bought 2 more in Salem, Ohio, a great little country blowtorch, which we loved. And that little baby just kept keeping us in business. When everything else went bad, that country station, as you know, had the loyalist listeners.
Yep.
They don't listen to anyone else. Country listeners are very loyal listeners. Long Neck Bottle, Get Out of My Hand, those great songs. But they were the last 2 that we bought. Yeah.
How long did you reign as a?
Well, until about 1998. So at that point, we received an offer that we just couldn't refuse.
Yeah.
We didn't want to leave, either one of us.
Now this was when all of the giants were coming in and buying up all this, since the Telecommunications Act.
Right. This was the Telecommunications Act of 1996. We were the first case.
Yeah.
So when we went to Washington, Bud and I and John Gubbiotti, with our box of files, there were 7 lawyers with blue suits and red ties on from the Federal Communications Commission, seated there.
Standard issue suit and tie.
You got it. Just standing there and taking all of our questions and answers. What the Telecommunications Act did was allow companies to buy more than 1 AM and 1 FM in the marketplace if your audience didn't go over 50%, so it wouldn't be a monopoly. And that's an issue that the FCC had never faced before. So they asked my brilliant partner, he had a master's in business and everything else, a graduate of Dartmouth, Bud, would you draft what you think this case should be decided with, what principles, and how you would decide the case? And so Bud said, sure. He drafted a 12-page report over the next 2-week period. We went back down to Washington, and he handed the report in. At that time, they said, we're not ready to decide this because this is all foreign to us, as it was to all of us. Mm-hmm. So about 6 months later, we got a call. We made a decision. And sure enough, as we started to read the decision, I said, Bud, this is your response. They had word for word
copied it over.
And that, my partner was the guy who led the passage of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and that opened up people buying radio stations all over the country, so that people like iHeart, who own almost 1,000 stations and own Wham now, could expand to wherever they wanted to go to. And that's why in 1998, when we were the recipients of an offer, which I said, my partner said, please be quiet. I said, that's too much money.
Yeah. Shh.
But said, Jack, I'll talk to you later.
There's no such thing as too much
There's
money.
no money. Yes, exactly. I said, you don't understand. You're offering more than the market bills. And we knew that from our group. And they said, no, you don't understand. What we don't want, we want stock prices. We don't care about day-to-day activity.
And that's...
And I still think it's wrong.
Yeah.
But that's what's happened, and that's why they're, like most industry today, a half a dozen or maybe a dozen total big-time radio owners in the whole country.
Yeah. I was only in professional radio for less than 10 years.
Yeah.
I was a radio geek, though. So, like, growing up, I listened to
Me
a
too.
lot of radio. Always wanted to be in radio. I've got
Me
those, stupid little tapes when I was 12 years old. Hey, WFTZ, Fitz
Yeah.
Radio.
Me too.
And I see where it's going now, and there's a lot of people that are in it. They're like, radio's great, this is happening, and I guess maybe I'm just old fashioned because I miss the way radio was. Like, you came up in the golden age
Oh, yes.
of radio, when radio was king.
It was. That's so
And-
true.
And that is just, you must be so grateful for that.
I am so lucky. I'm very fortunate. I thank the big guy above it's for putting me in radio when I was in radio. I just never,
Yeah.
I tell my 8 grandkids, if you love what you do, you never have to work a day in your life. I never felt I worked a day in your
Yeah.
life. For me to go to work in the morning was pure pleasure.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go play music and laugh all morning.
I'd laugh all morning. I had a great engineer, Don Ariano, greatest comedy person I've ever met. We had fun all day. That's all we did, and I got paid for it.
What was do you have, and I know this is probably an impossible question, but do you have like one memory that if you go back was like the most fun, the most amazing, something that really stands out? I'm sure you have dozens. What's one thing that you could really say was like, wow, that was just incredible?
Well, I had quite a few of those.
I know. I saw the pictures.
Yeah. Yeah, I had quite a few. Among the many things I would never have had the opportunity to do if I wasn't in radio was to meet 3 presidents.
Yeah,
I mean,
that works.
son of a plumber out of Arundicoits, got to talk to a president. One of them was
Yes, son of a plumber.
son of a plumber. I remember President Bush, number 1, the elder. We did a fundraiser right around the corner from your studio here in Bushnell's Basin. Right around the corner, we did a fundraiser for the Republican Party. And so we put little stickers under the chairs for door prizes.
Mm-hmm.
So he turned his chair over and there was a door prize. So I said, congratulations, Mr. President. You have won a toaster. And President Bush, the senior, said, it's all worthwhile coming to Rochester, isn't it, Jack? I said, it sure is, Mr. President. That was one. The second one also was the president. When Ronald Reagan was president, he came to the War Memorial for a fundraiser. And as I was emceeing, sitting behind him, as I looked over my shoulder, there were 3 Secret Service folks with raincoats over their arm. As I looked, I saw a glint of steel.
Yeah.
And I said, whoa.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say one word.
Was that before the or after the assassination attempt?
That was just before.
Just before.
Yeah. So those two stick in my mind, but so many others. One of the many things that Kodak did at that time was to fly about a dozen of us in radio, newspaper, TV, for the Kodak Coach of the Year award. All over the country, we would go in the Kodak jet to record a 60-second spot. You were in the wrong time. You know, Fitz. You could have really had fun. I met John Wayne sitting on a bar stool. He's bigger than he is on a horse out in San Francisco drinking scotch. We were down in Florida, and we had to wait on the tarmac for the president of Kodak to finish a card game before it would take off. And we met some wonderful Bear Bryant, the coaches from all over here. So met people that I could never, ever conceived of meeting in any other line of work.
Yeah.
So those would be some of the major highlights.
Who out of your mind comes out as being, one of the most personable, one of the most approachable of the celebrities, of the big names that you met?
The big names? I would John Wayne was.
Yeah.
He was, what a down-to-earth guy.
Well, if your name is Marion when you first
yeah.
you have to be down to earth some way.
No wonder he's so tough. Huh?
Yeah, right.
I would think I'd like to be named Marion. Yeah, he was one of the biggest, and we met John Glenn. That one time they took us to Houston. Another time they took us down to Lauderdale, and I caught an ugly 150-pound grouper.
That's terrible. It wasn't a square grouper, was it?
I don't know what.
The square groupers of the 80s, that was when they used to find big bales of cocaine and marijuana out. We used to call those square
groupers. Those square groupers?
Yeah,
I didn't know that. See, you Florida guys know that stuff. Yeah.
What an incredible career. What a blessing it has been. And what you did, whether you knew it or not, was pave the way for some other great people that came into radio here that are still doing it. They're still in the market, and they're still, hanging on and doing what they do so well.
Yes.
But the industry is changing. I don't think it's changing for the better, but I know with every industry you have to evolve with it, or else you get cast aside.
Yes.
So that's just the reality of where it is. The content is king, and radio now is just a piece of the puzzle of getting that content out there for the companies.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And the part that I miss is the community connection, the local jock that his stories, her family, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And that's the stuff that I miss, the morning show like that. But there's still a few of them hanging around.
Yes. Yeah. And I hope they continue to. You're right. Everything is cyclical. So I hope it does come around a little bit. It'll take some creative thinking and some courageous thinking.
Yeah.
Where you'll bet some bucks on what you think. And that's always the ultimate question before you go into business. And that's why successful business people deserve to be respected.
Because they gambled.
They gambled. That's where the fruit is, out at the end of the limb.
And it doesn't matter if they gambled with their money or someone else's money.
No.
As long as you win.
Prefer the others, but
Yeah. So, what would you say to someone who's loves radio, wants to get into radio now, and you can't say don't?
No, okay.
No, you wouldn't say that.
No, I wouldn't say that. But my oldest son, John, is still in radio. He's a senior exec at Wham and doing very well and loves it too. I would say that if you love it, do it. If you don't love it, don't do it. Because radio is going to require someone who doesn't count how many hours he has to work. It's going to be led, I think, by some courageous people who are rather to reinvent it or try something that hasn't ever been tried before, whether it's something like you're doing here, podcast. Who knows what it's going to do, but it's going to take someone with some courage to do it and have enough courage to bet their bucks on it.
That's, you know what? I think that's a great statement. The courage is, from what I hear from folks, is where it's lacking, and the management doesn't have the courage to take a risk and say, let's try this because I really have a hunch it's going to work because, well, no one's ever done that before and we shouldn't do that. And I'm going to risk my job. And
yes,
it's especially now with where the money is and all that, it's really tough to take that leap, but it is going to take someone like that.
It is. It's going to take someone with the courage to do something which is against the tide. I just was listening to a New York City station. Yes, this is the Yankee station.
The Yankee station, yeah.
And they just fired their general manager, and a couple of the guys on the air had the courage to say, "This was a dumb move." This guy who's been here for 30 years, when the bean counters control the business, that's what happens, because everything rests on the bottom line. Not that you shouldn't pay attention. You've got to.
It's a tough line to walk, isn't it?
It sure is.
Yeah.
But where do you draw the line? No pun intended.
Yeah. Difficult questions to answer. So where can people pick up your book? Is it on Amazon or
it's it's at Wegmans.
It's at Wegmans?
Yep.
All right.
At your
Perfect.
friendly Wegmans store.
Your book's right here, as you can see.
Thank you.
You can get them at
had
Wegmans.
hair at one time.
I like that shirt.
Yeah.
That is a snazzy looking shirt.
Couple people have commented on that. Not all so charitably.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to come out to Bushells Basin and hang out and talk about radio in the good old days.
Anytime, Fitz.
And,